this week on Moyers Company.
Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. That's Christianity. The rest of it isn't worth a hill of beans.
And did you ever write from anger?
Oh, yes. Gosh, yeah, I wrote a lot of terrible poems from anger. Yes.
What made you the angriest?
The conditions that are imposed upon the poor by the rich.